Today's recipe is for Knoephla soup. I've never made this from scratch before, so this is my first attempt. I'll give you some of the tips I learned along the way. And the ingredients you'll need are 2 large carrots, 2 stalks of celery, 8 cups of broth, 1/2 medium onion, 4 tablespoons butter, 1/2 cup heavy cream, 2 1/4 cups flour divided, 2 eggs, 1/2 a cup of milk, 2 teaspoons salt, and 1 teaspoon pepper. So very simple ingredients, and I actually made this as a result of the fact that I had just a little bit of carrots from my garden left. I happen to have some celery. I happen to have a bunch of broth I made. So really just making this out of a way to use up some of these ingredients that I have and not need to go get anything else. I also had just a little half a bag of 3-pound potatoes for those red potatoes. So all these ingredients came together nicely to use them up. First, you need to chop up your veggies. So here I am cutting up the celery, and you'll see that I cut the stalks down the middle a couple of times. I wanted to make the celery small because my son doesn't really care for celery, the texture and eating it as a chunk, but you could definitely just slice these. I'm also going to add an onion in here, and I am just doing a quick mince by cutting down the sides, then creating rows, and then cutting across to mince, or dice, however you want to see that, very small. And then same for my carrots. These are the last of the carrots from my gardens. These are kind of the smaller ones that the girls haven't eaten yet. And again, you'll see I'm cutting them into smaller pieces because my kids like them just a little bit smaller as well, but you could definitely just plain slice them. I also like to, as you're noticing me, set aside the tops of the carrots, the bottoms of the celery, the top I cut off that onion. I like to save all of those because that's how I make my broth. So I have a bag here, you'll see, that's in my freezer, and I just add my little scraps to it until it's full, or until the next time I make a whole chicken, and then I can roast it up with those vegetables for flavoring and use it for broth. So I just keep this in my freezer and add to it along the way. First thing to cook here, then we have to melt the 4 tablespoons of butter over the stove and then add in our vegetables. And we're just going to cook these until they become softened. So you've got some pretty firm vegetables there. The carrots will take a few minutes and the celery, and then we want the onions to be a little bit more translucent. So just giving them a quick stir, and we're going to let them cook about 5 minutes. I do like to multitask while I cook, so while these are getting softened on the stove, I'm going to start working on cutting up my potatoes. I do peel my potatoes because I think in a soup it's better to not have those skins floating around, but if they're really thin skins or maybe right out of your garden, you may not have to do that. And then these are small red potatoes, so I'm just cutting them in half again, and then cutting sideways until they make small enough chunks for a soup, so about that big. And the ones that are larger, of course, I might, instead of cut in half, cut into thirds and then cut across, but really just keeping it simple, trying to keep the size of each potato to about the same so that they cook at the same rate is the important part. So here I'm going to go ahead and chop up the rest of these potatoes, and then I'm going to start feeling around in the bowl to see if there are any chunks that were a little larger than the others. So using my fingers to kind of just feel the difference in the sizes, and I'll pick out any that are too big and give them an extra little cut. Back on the stove, I'm going to give a stir here. You see that the onions are now cooked pretty well and the carrots and the celery are softened. We're going to add about 1/4 cup of flour, and this is going to add a little bit as a thickener and help us create a bit of a roux here. So we're going to sprinkle that in and then just stir it so that it soaks up all the butter and juices from those vegetables and each is evenly coated. And then just allowing it to cook, right about 1 minute, just enough time for the flour to cook a little bit and not taste so raw. Then our next step is going to be to add our broth. I have homemade chicken broth and it is very concentrated. So I am going to use actually 1 quart of my concentrated broth and then 1 quart of water, which would be 8 cups. Or if you're using out of the carton from the store, you'd want to use a full 8 cups of chicken broth. To get started, we're just going to pour in about 1 cup. You'll see here that it quickly is thickening up and creating that base of the soup. then you can add the rest in. So here I'm just adding in the rest of that concentrated stock, and then I'll add in 1 jar of water as well to make up my full 8 cups. Give it a quick stir just to get everything combined and ready to go. You can set this for medium-high temperature, and then we are going to put in our potatoes. Depending on the size that you cut your potatoes, this could take anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes. Mine are about in the middle, so it took about 30 minutes overall for the potatoes to get soft. So I've got lots of time here now in between, and I do like to multitask. So here we're going to start creating our dumplings that go in the Knoephla soup. If I would have been smart, I would have cracked the eggs first and beat them up in that bowl there that I've got the flour in, but a little brain fart, and so I guess we're going to dirty 1 extra dish this time. That's okay. You got 2 eggs. You want to beat them until they are well combined, so there's no separation between the yolk and the whites. And then you're just combining all of the ingredients together. So this is 2 cups of flour, 2 beaten eggs, 1/2 cup of milk, and 1 teaspoon of salt. I like to use wooden spoons when making a dough just because I find it's a little bit less sticky and helps to stir dough a little better than something that's like a silicone or a metal. So once it starts to come together, you'll want to get it on your counter, or for me, I have this baking mat because then it doesn't pick up anything from my counter or stick to it. And you'll want to start pressing it together and kneading it a bit. And I am finding here, you see, very, very sticky. So sometimes you might need to add just a little bit more flour. And what I'm doing here is just adding some flour as I go until it stops being so sticky. Be careful not to add too much flour or you'll have a very dense dumpling, and you don't want that. So I'm really just adding enough so that I can knead it together and roll it without it coming, sticking to my hands. You can then separate it in half. And actually I learned, again, this is my first time making this, but I learned I'd probably separate this into quarters because as you'll see here, I'm trying to roll this into a long, like snake. And I am having trouble getting the whole thing to be that 1 inch in diameter size. So eventually I just kind of give up on that and cut it in half again. And it was much easier then to work with just a quarter of it at a time, and I could roll it between my hands a lot better. So I would give you that tip if this is your first time as well. Then I'm just using a butter knife to cut into little dumplings. And these are what we're going to put into our pot at the very end when we're at the last 5 minutes of cook time. They only take a few minutes to cook, so you don't want to throw them in with the potatoes right away because those probably have still another 20 minutes by the time you're done doing this. So I'm just going to make them all up and cut them into these little pieces. I'm kind of tossing them in that flour a little bit just so that they stay separated, so that they cook separate. Once you're all done with your dumplings and you're in that last 5 minutes of cook time, you'll see I'm simmering on the stove here. That's when you're going to put them in. And you'll see I'm putting them in one at a time instead of scraping the whole bowl in. It's because I want to make sure that they do cook up separately. They take about 5 minutes to cook, again, depending on how big you've made them, but your indicator that they are done is going to be when they start to float. So here you'll see after I've got them all in and it's been cooking a minute or two that they start to float to the top. You want to make sure to stir after you've added them all in so that everything's combined and separated. Here you're seeing that they're starting to float to the top, so I know I'm just about done with the soup, and I just want to give it a stir. And I'm going to double check one of the potatoes, make sure it's all the way done before I get ready to serve. And it is, so we're good to go there. The last step is to add the heavy whipping cream. I find that cream is the best, but I suppose you could also substitute some half and half, whole milk if you only have that. But the cream really gives a nice finish, a silky finish to this soup. So don't skimp on that. I had this left over from another event we had this last weekend. So just stir it together and that's it. You've got your soup. This was so good. I just found that maybe I'd want to season with more salt and pepper. And you'll see in the ingredients I've added 1 teaspoon of salt and 1 teaspoon of pepper extra because I definitely felt it needed that after we tried it. I hope you give this a try and enjoy a warm bowl of soup. Take care. Bye.